Now, I want to go to our mate Michael Shoebridge over at the Australian Strategic Policy Centre. Did I get that right, Michael? You're the director there?
You did, Rowan. Thank you.
Fantastic. It's great to see you. Now, the big news that we had was the Chinese Communist Party's push into Australia's backyard has now been confirmed, Michael. Yesterday, the Solomon Islands officials agreed to a so-called security cooperation framework. Sounds very benign, with Beijing, which will allow Chinese warships and soldiers to be based in the Solomon Islands, just a couple of thousand kilometres from our shores. What do you make of it, Michael?
Well, Rowan, the Sogavare government is clearly doing this, but they're busily trying to deny what it actually means. So Sogavare got extremely cranky that the draft was leaked, and now he says the draft doesn't say what we see the draft does say. He says there's no chance there'll be a Chinese military base in the Solomons, but the text says that according to China's needs, the Solomons will let the Chinese military support its ships with logistics to allow them to operate. And that logistics facility sounds just like the way the Chinese described what they now say is a base in Djibouti off the Horn of Africa. Now, for a couple of years, while they were in the middle of getting that base built and negotiated, they were very coy, and they called it a logistics support facility. And they talked about it enabling China to make contributions to regional security. That sounds just like what we're hearing out of the Chinese embassy in the Solomons now. So it is big news. There's still some remote hope that Sogavare doesn't sign it after its initials, but I think that's an empty hope. He's going to follow this through.
So, Michael, what could we, worst case scenario, I guess, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but worst case scenario, what sort of military capabilities could Xi Jinping end up having in the Solomons?
Well, we'll see more of those PLA-guided missile destroyers, that one that came across the top of Australia's coastline and used its military-grade laser aggressively against our Royal Australian Air Force P-8 Maritime Patrol aircraft. So we'll see the kind of incidents that you see now daily in the South China Sea happening in the South Pacific because of an aggressive Chinese Navy that can support its vessels out of the Solomons. That is the worst case, and that leads to military tension and potential conflict in our backyard. That's what's got the attention of the Fijian president, the Prime Minister of PNG, and the President of the Federated States of Micronesia. That last one, the President of the FSM, wrote a particularly polite, extremely concerned letter to Sogavare, telling him what he was doing shouldn't proceed because of the implications for everyone else's security.
So, basic question, Michael, what should Australia be doing? What should our response be?
Well, we have to bell the cat first off and let the Solomons public know what their government is planning to do, help the Solomons opposition in that battle. But we've got to remember 90% of Solomon Islanders in recent polls have said they much prefer relationships with liberal democracies like Australia than authoritarian governments like Beijing. So we've got to widen the gap between Sogavare and the Solomon Islands public, and we've got to call on other South Pacific leaders to also intervene. And then we've got to remember Sogavare won't be in government forever. So set the ground for a new government post-Sogavare to end this dangerous relationship.
And there was talk in what they signed about, China being allowed to put forces, whatever that means, to protect various assets and so on. Things seem to be moving pretty quickly. We seem to be getting, there's the threat now we'll have Chinese, soldiers or police, whatever you want to call it. How dangerous is this?
Well, that bit is most dangerous for the Solomon Islands population themselves. It really has the spectre of Sogavare having to side with the Chinese military. And I always think the black comedy named People's Armed Police, a heavily armed paramilitary police that the Chinese use against their own citizens. They're saying they'll deploy them into the Solomons to protect Chinese projects and people there. Well, the Solomons has had anti-China riots before. So the prospect is that Chinese military forces are intervening against the Solomon Islands population, and their prime minister is siding with the foreign military being used against his own people. That's the kind of thing, I think, that makes this unsustainable.
Well, Michael Shoebridge, it's great to chat to you, but every time we chat, it just seems they're getting closer and closer. It's a more threatening world that we live in, and is Australia prepared? Are we defended? Very briefly, Michael, do we have the appropriate assets?
No, we don't. We're stuck in a time warp. Our defence organisation is working to timeframes that will make us safer by 2040. Nothing in their activity over the last 10 years has shown that their timeframes for action to improve our security connect to the actual environment and the change we're seeing. And that has to change, and it has to change fast.
Absolutely, and it depends on what government we get next, and I certainly know which government I don't want to see. Michael Shoebridge, thank you so much for your time this evening.